Well, kia ora koutou. Thank you very much for this opportunity to share our story from a couple of farmers local to this place here. How does this work? Here we go. So, yeah, I've been invited to share our story around resilience through land use diversity. As Chris said, my name's Cameron Henderson. I am a farmer, first and foremost, but here representing the Waimakariri Landcare Trust for the purposes of this project. So I guess what I wanted to share with you is a little bit about the Landcare Trust itself, some of the challenges that we're facing in the Waimakariri district around land use and the future of land use sustainable agriculture, and the process we've gone through around looking at alternative land use in our district and some of the lessons that have come out of that. So I'll start just quickly with who am I? As I said, farmer based up in the upper reaches of the Waimak district. So for those that are not familiar, the Canterbury, Christchurch sits down here, Kaipoi and Rangiora up here. So my two farms are the little yellow boxes up there. Up near Oxford, we've got a dairy farm, 240 hectare dairy farm, and a 200 hectare arable and dairy support farm. Pretty standard Canterbury farms, dead flat, pivot irrigation, very stony, leaky soils, and the district itself has got sort of stonier, leakier soils up the top end, and as you get closer towards the coast, heavier soils with a bit of hill country up around the top end as well. So if you want to, I wear a few hats, and if you want to know them all, they're all in the book there, but I guess for the purposes of this story, the two key ones are my time with the Waimakariri Zone Committee through the Plan Change 7 process, and my time with the Waimakariri Landcare Trust, which two are both very well linked together. So I'll talk a little bit more about both of those. So what is the story? What is the challenge in Waimakariri? Look, it's not too different to the rest of our region. Through Environment Canterbury's Land and Water Regional Planning process, we are, or the Waimakariri is one of 10 geographic zones that each have their own chapter in the plan. And we went through the plan change process over the last 5 years, and culminating in Plan Change 7, which affects our geographic district, which is the top map there. Looking at a host of things, land use, biodiversity, but I guess the key topic that I'm talking about today is around the nitrate management. So I was part of the zone committee that created what was then called the ZIPPA, Zone Implementation Plan Addendum, a set of recommendations that went into what became Plan Change 7, and crossing, as I say, a whole lot of environmental aspects, including nutrient use and land use rules. So, as many of you are aware, Canterbury hydrology is a bit different to a lot of other regions around the country. We can't see where our water flows, particularly on the plains. We can't, just draw a boundary around the ridge lines and assume all that water flows overland. You can't just measure it as it travels across the land. Most of it is flowing underneath, and so we needed, for the purposes of the plan change, an idea of, well, actually, where is our water coming from and where is it going? So ECAN created a model based on a number of layers of data, one of them being that top map there is land use across the district, and you may not be able to see the writing on there, but the blue, the darkish blue, is the intensive dairy or dairy farming, generally intensive farming. The upper reaches are more sheep and beef, so less intensive land use. So you can see the majority of our intensive land use is that bottom half of our zone, of our district. The water is generally flowing from left to right, mountains to the sea. We have a couple of major rivers, the Ashley Rakahura and the Waimak is on the bottom of that map. And generally the water is flowing from the mountains down under the plains and then pops up in a number of lowland waterways along the coastline. So creating this model, there was land use as one of the data sets. There was soil maps, climate, weather mapping, and also, I guess, an indication of what are the key water outcomes that we're looking for out of this whole planning process. And the three key ones for us were drinking water across the plains in the towns, stream recharge, so where that water's popping back up in the lowland streams, and the impacts on the Christchurch aquifer, their drinking water system as well. Those are the three key things that we were looking at, and all the, I guess, the biological activity and cultural activity that surrounds those three aspects. So out of all that mapping that happened, there was a map created, which is the bottom one here, around what nutrient reductions might look like or would need to look like to achieve the outcomes, particularly of the National Policy Statement for Freshwater Management, but also community outcomes as well. And this is for nitrates only, so there was a lot of maps for E. coli and sediment, but this is primarily focused on nitrates. So you won't be able to read the writing there, but the light blue is a 30% reduction in nutrients. That's the lower end, right up to the purple zone there, which is 90% reductions in nitrates. And at the time that the map came out, these were the most strict reductions, perceived reductions anywhere in the country. It does affect, as you can see, really just covers that intensive land use at the bottom part of the map. Now, the MPS for freshwater management was updated during the hearings process for Plan Change 7, and there was some initial work done on if these are the reductions required to get to a DIN of 6.9, what would getting to DIN of 2.4 look like? And those numbers quite often would go over 100%, which is quite a hard thing to fathom for a farmer when you've got to essentially reduce your nutrient losses to zero. So that's sort of what, I guess, got a lot of people's attention, a lot of farmers' attention of, well, actually, if I need to get to zero or near to it, what does that look like for me, and can I continue doing what I'm doing, and if not, what else might it look like? Oh, and just, I guess, for those that are interested, Plan Change 7 didn't end up using all those coloured zones. It actually just painted everything in a light blue, so kind of setting us a direction of travel. So let's all head in the same direction for now, and as time progresses, we'll see what further action needs to be taken. So so out of Plan Change 7, there was a lot of shocked farmers and concerned farmers around, well, how, what do we do? What are the options? That's where the Waimakariri Landcare Trust came from. So the trust itself was set up by a number of younger farmers just concerned about the future viability for agriculture in the area. It's farmer-led and is looking at ultimately sustainable agriculture from a number of aspects, not just nitrates and water quality. It's now covering climate change and biodiversity and a number of factors. As I say, it came about as part of Plan Change 7, and our first major project was looking at across a number of factors actually, supported by SFFF. It was called the Next Generation Farming Project, and it had 4 key pillars. One was around showcasing good farm management practice, latest innovations in a local context, so farmers could sort of get in and touch and feel and see what it looked like. Integrated farm planning, so building a framework around what an integrated farm plan might look like. Community connection, so that's helping farmers better understand what the urban community is asking for of them, and vice versa. And the part that I'm talking about today is around diverse land use, so what else could we do with our land? So the Diverse Land Use Project itself, it was a pretty big idea of, there's a lot that could be done, a lot of information to kind of filter through. So luckily our Land and Water were looking for some case study catchments to work with. They were looking at, similar ideas. And so we jumped on board with them alongside AgResearch, DairyNZ Plant and Food, to try and distill what we were trying to achieve. And we ended up with 2 key goals. One was around what is a holistic decision-making framework that would help farmers understand what their options are. So it's not just economic or environmental, the 2 key ones. It's around what does it mean for your family if you're looking at succession, what does it mean for the people on the farm, what does it mean for your day-to-day lifestyle, is this something you even want to have a go at? The second one was around, I guess, just helping people understand what was important to them as well. Are they doing the change purely for environmental reasons, or are there other motivators in there as well? So the process, essentially, we got a whole lot of farmers from across the district. When you start talking about diverse land use, it kind of pricks up people's ears. Everyone's really excited about, what else could we be doing with our land? And got a whole lot of farmers in the room and said, right, well, blue sky, if you could do whatever you like with your land, what would you look at doing? And so this is the list that they came out with. There's some options that are just a slight variation of current options around vegetables and seeds and things, through to solar farming, quail eggs. I don't know why quail. Someone must have liked quail eggs. To agritourism, gorse. Apparently, someone had tried gorse wine and thought maybe that could be an option. So I don't know. This blue sky. That's what you get out of blue sky. So that was step 1. Step 2, we wanted to look at 4 case study farms to really go in depth on the modelling to see, well, what if we were to apply some of these land uses, what would they look like, and comparability from an economic and an environmental perspective. So ended up with 4 farms, 2 dairy farms, irrigated intensive dairy farms, different soil types, an arable farm, there again with quite a diverse range of soils, and a sheep and beef farm looking at different topographies, and of course having a range of current land uses gives you a good economic mix too when you're doing the comparison. So are these other land uses economically comparable to their current land use? And they were baselined from an economic and an environmental perspective. Third step, we got all those farmers back in the room again and said, right, well, we've done the blue sky thing now, let's get real. What are the key things or the key land uses that you think might be viable in this area, given your knowledge, given you're all farmers in the area? The farmers or the owners of each of the case study farms got to have 1 pick of land use. Our group of experts from our partners came in and they got to have 1 pick per farm. And then the farmer group as a whole got to choose another 2, and so this is the range that we narrowed it down to. So you can see there's probably some general themes there around a move away from animal agriculture. There are some in there, generally taking the animals off the land, but as a general theme it's more into some horticulture, but generally permaculture, so tree crops and ETS type farming. So those options we then threw back at our experts. They were the ones that had all the information and the data and the ability to pull all that together into what would this look like on those case study farms. So they had a wealth of information, and I think you've probably heard about some of it today and some of the tools that are available. The key one for us was the data supermarket, which is part of the digital tool shed of looking at land use options. And this is just an example map here, the 2 maps of New Zealand. The one on your left is just an example for apples, suitability score for apples, so it ranges from 0 to 1, and the different colours give you an idea of the different regions that are most suitable for this particular crop, being apples. The map on your right is the potential yield in tonnes per hectare, so 0 is purple, and yellow at the top is 120 tonnes a hectare. So it's very easy geospatial information to be able to pull together and start putting some numbers around what does this look like in these different areas. So a really valuable tool. And on top of that, the climate models, Overseer obviously to look at the environmental impact of some of these crops where it was useful, and Farmax to try and pull all that information together with economics. And the winner out of all of that, well, we've had a number of people come in and talk about the viability of it all, and actually the economics of everything works to a certain degree, but there's some hurdles to it. And look, I put the question mark there because we haven't actually finished the project yet. We're still waiting on the final reports and the detail from each of the case study farms. But in the meantime, we've had a number of experts from these particular industries come in and talk to farmers about what do these different land uses look like, what is the seasonality of it, what does the workload look like, what are some of the key constraints around what you need to invest in, what would that look like. And so there's some really key lessons that I think have come out of that part of the process that are probably most telling beyond what the final economic numbers might tell us. And these are them here. So the first one is really farmers can produce anything. Look, we've got enough knowledge in this country between CRIs and industry groups and other farmers and the universities to essentially grow whatever we like, wherever we like. Yep, there's going to be some variances in yield and cost of growing, but the actual growing or the making of the product itself was not a huge hurdle. Farmers could see most of this was possible. The key risks, and I think you might have heard a little bit about this earlier, is around the outside the farm gate stuff. So key ones around supply and demand. If we had a broad change of land use across Canterbury, not just in our district but across the region or even nationally into a new land use type, do we swamp the market for whatever that product might be? And then does that lead to price instability? So you might have the first few that go in this direction, which really profit really well out of that particular market. But then if you have a lot of followers, do you end up with instability in pricing, which means that their business model kind of falls over. Big questions around finance and banking. So it's a huge capital requirement to get some of this land use change to happen. If you think about dairy in itself, dairy sheds, irrigation, it's quite an expensive industry to get into. When you get into hops or apples, you've got the seed stock, you've got the infrastructure, the drying sheds to build. What are the bank's view on that? What is the risk that the bank sees in that, and hence the lending rates? And then ultimately land value as well. That's the majority where the farmer's capital is tied up. So if you were doing something that is quite seen as quite risky by other people that are looking to buy the land, then unfortunately that's probably going to hurt your land value, and are you able to take that risk? And then there's everything, I guess, the supply chain outside the farm gate. The farmers felt confident of delivering to the farm gate, and if you look at most of our pastoral models, that's what our industry has been built on, is delivering meat, milk to the farm gate, and there's someone else that kind of takes care of it after that. So if you're jumping into an industry or a part of the country that may not necessarily have that supply chain in place, what risk does that involve? So, if the early farmers are having to invest in their own harvesters and their own drying equipment, packaging, and then develop the route to market, branding, that's a lot of work that traditionally pastoral farmers are not particularly skilled in. That's not their skill set. So what are some of the risks around that? And so it kind of came back to farmers saying, well, look, actually, what we really need is a pioneer who's got deep pockets to really give it a nudge to start with, show us what's possible, develop that supply chain, and then we'll follow. And if you want to do that at scale, if that's the answer to meeting some of our environmental outcomes, we need a lot of external support for this to happen, because these are big barriers, and there's it's farmers want to see the risk mitigation. So it looks like I'm running out of time, but just quickly, things have moved on in those 5 years since Plan Change 7 was first dreamed up, and as the challenge is looking back, well, do we still need the change to happen? There's a lot of things that are variable and dynamic. Politics overseas has been updated a number of times. We've got more accurate data around monitoring, and we're finding that actually just tinkering with our farm systems alongside better monitoring and modelling has shown we're actually making big inroads into our challenge. And so farmers have come back more recently in the project and said, actually, we see much lower risk in just continual improving our system, if we're given the time to do that, than to clean the slate and say, we want to go and do something completely different. So I think there will always be that backstop, that challenge of, actually, do we want to take that risk on if we're finding that the tools are now available for us to just adapt our current land use rather than change entirely. So I will stop there and say thank you very much to our partners, and I'm happy to take questions.
I've got time perhaps for the top one, maybe top two.
Okay. So what nitrate levels were you getting in the water before? So I'm guessing that's before we're looking at land use change. So there's a long story to this, and I'll try and summarise it very, very quickly. Water in the Waimakariri, apart from a few hotspots, is actually pretty good. The model was predicting it was going to get much worse, and so that's why the modelling was so important, that we get that accurate, because the land use rules are really about preventing a future outcome, not necessarily fixing a current one, which is a little bit different to other parts of Canterbury. There are some question marks too around what the model was throwing up, that we're getting some very high nitrate readings in the upper part of the catchment, well above all our intensive agriculture. So that's why, as another part of our Landcare Trust project, just to understand, is the model accurate? Are we seeing the outcomes that the model was predicting? And so, as I say, apart from those hotspot areas, really this is around preventing a future issue. And so there's a range of nitrate levels within that, but I won't go into that in too much detail.
Can you have a crack at the top one?
Canterbury has a higher proportion of corporate farms. Have some of these corporates taken a leap on a more risky land use? Yep, we've got a big one in the middle of Waimak, Synlait Farming. Their dairy operation is on some of our lighter soils, and they've taken a huge risk, and also a SFFF project around regenerative farming. for the good of themselves, but also for Canterbury and the wider New Zealand area. So corporates, I see personally, as one of those key drivers of being able to take that risk. You know, they've got one of many farms that they can take the risk with rather than their entire business operation. So I see them as a real tool across the board and throughout the country to be able to progress different farm systems.
I think we'll leave it there. So once again, thank you, Karen. And